Hi, everyone. My name is Rich Gill. I'm the program director of Sound and Scene. Thank you all for tuning into our world virtual premiere of I Really Get Into It, the underage architects of Sioux Falls punk, right? Did I get all of that?
You got it.
Correct. I'm here with a couple of the filmmakers. Before we start, why don't you just introduce yourselves and let everyone know what you had to do with the movie?
Ladies first.
Yeah, ladies first.
I'm Brienne Maner, and I have been very luckily given the title of co-producer of this documentary, but more importantly, I'm Brian's wife.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm Brian Bieber. I directed the movie, and not surprisingly, Brienne is kind of, I think, underselling her role. So, so she is absolutely the producer. It's also important that she's my wife. I feel like our marriage is more important than the movie, but she also played
slightly.
She played a very.
I feel like are we in a therapy session now?
Yeah,
it's like working through.
Should we go get on the couch?
Yeah, we're not maybe working through. We were working through some stuff that.
Well, thank you both for joining me this morning, evening, whenever people are watching this. So for my first question, this is a very interesting time for art and especially movies and music and things like that. How far along into the film were you when the pandemic hit, and how, if any, effect did it have on the release plans? If you had interviews that you were still doing, anything like that.
The plan was to do a screening, like an actual premiere screening physically in Sioux Falls in early summer. So that was my plan as of last winter, and obviously then that kind of didn't happen, or wasn't going to happen. We realized, like, even like late February, when we kind of I was at a show, and I was in Rochester after actually doing an interview, and I was talking to Dessa, who's of Doomtree, who's a friend of mine. She had a show there, and I'm just thinking back to February and like these kind of surreal conversations you would have. And so we were chatting before the show, and I was like, "Hey, what do you think of this, like, coronavirus thing?" I was like, "Is this going to be a thing? What do you think?" She's like, "I don't know, man. It's kind of getting weird." She's like, "I feel like I might have to cancel some shows." And we're like, "Yeah, well, hopefully it'll just blow over." Like, we just had this sort of, and at that point, yeah. So the plan was like early summer to do a screening in a theater in Sioux Falls, and then try to get it in festivals, and then sometime down the line do a DVD. And then I think pretty early during the lockdown, I thought, well, I'm going to take the time to rework some stuff that I'm not super jazzed about. Like, I would say I was about 80% there in terms of the narrative. And then, so I kind of backtracked and made some changes, and decided we were going to do a home release first, and then.
So in a way, the pandemic was a blessing.
Oh God!
If nothing else, it helped with this film. So.
Yeah, exactly.
It did.
Yeah.
It really, like, if you think about it, though, the pandemic, I don't mean to make light of it by any means, but this time that we've been afforded, I work for Zeal Center for Entrepreneurship here in Sioux Falls. So I'm supporting startups, entrepreneurs, just helping them get to the next step in their journey. And having this time has been a blessing. I truly mean that, because we've been able to kind of reassess and give ourselves a little space to think and breathe, even though it's, that space has been taken up by anxiety and other things. I really truly believe that Brian's work is better for the fact that he was afforded this time. He was forced to have this time to focus on the details. I think the product, I mean, not that it wasn't wonderful already, but the product
wasn't wonderful.
is really something. So
yeah, that's nice. And I do think the pandemic, even though it's this awful thing, and no matter what your situation, I think it has forced everyone to sort of reset in terms of like priorities, whether that's like creative or personal were. I mean,
Yep.
we're extremely privileged in our situation because we're able to work
Absolutely.
from home. So we're very fortunate that way. So yeah, so I guess in this instance, but like in this um, specific sort of instance, it's that time kind of took the pressure off the feeling of like, well, I need to have this done by
Mhm.
June 1st or whatever, and instead I created added pressure of figuring out how like how to do a home release.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Rochester. I grew up in Rochester. I'm
Oh,
from
did you really?
Rochester.
Okay.
And kind of getting into the film, like I said, I was talking to Becky Hanton about a week ago, and she asked me if I saw myself in the film, not like physically that I was there, but growing up in Rochester, it was again like Sioux Falls, where it was just a scene of a bunch of kids who were putting shows together on their own, getting the bands, all that stuff. There's a million docs about Chicago, San Francisco, LA, all that stuff. But this is really it's about Sioux Falls, but it's about any place USA.
Mhm.
Why do you think films like this are important, or stories like this are important to tell when it comes to DIY scenes and stuff like that?
Well, I think they're important to tell because because of just what you just said. We're not, Sioux Falls isn't Chicago. It's certainly not New York or DC. But for one thing, towns like Rochester and Sioux Falls are the reason why those bands were able to thrive. Like you can't play out 200 days out of the year if you're not if you don't have 200 venues to play in. And, if there aren't a bunch of if you don't have all these small towns and cities and scenes supporting you along the way, then those larger scenes don't exist. So like in a lot of ways, the smaller scenes across the country feed these sort of hubs. Also, I think it's also just important to show people, and maybe on the one hand, like show people what was going on at the time. I think it's important for people to know that. Like, I've sort of pitched this to people that maybe don't have an interest in Sioux Falls punk rock or punk rock in general, but I've pitched it to people in town and saying like, this is a part of our town's history that you probably didn't know about. No one cared and no one was writing about it, and those of us that were documenting what was happening, most of us weren't thinking about preserving that documentation. So all of all the documentation of what was happening is spread out into people's boxes and people's closets and garages now, across the country or across the world. And so I kind of took this as an opportunity to consolidate some of that. Obviously it's not a comprehensive account of like everything that ever happened in the scene, but it's at least a document of what of kind of what it was like, and why it was important. That was sort of what I was going for.
I'd add too, it was interesting watching you go through the post editing process and some of the pivotal decisions that were made based on the fact that I think Brian was trying to convey an Anytown USA story, and being concerned that getting too specific about the details of Sioux Falls would deter, any, universal interest in the story of Sioux Falls. But I think it really lent itself well to people being able to relate, because they were able to just have a little inside scoop into what these people's lives were like, and these scenes really, like, Sioux Falls isn't unique, other than the fact that our community is unique in whatever way we make it unique because of the people that were in it. But I guess what I'm trying to say was I think Brian made the right decisions, to make this documentary unique to Sioux Falls, but yet it still resonates with other communities. And I think that's really what makes it special.
Yeah. And were you gonna?
No, I wasn't. I was gonna say.
Yeah, no, I think that's all, that's excellent, because it's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm not really as involved in the scene now as I was when I was 16, 17, 23.
Wait, you're not?
I know. I'm 41 and I have a 10-year-old. It's crazy
Yeah,
that I can't go to
exactly.
basement shows all the time.
Yeah.
But
That's why we're all wearing these dark glasses
Yeah.
to hide our bags under our eyes.
But like, so like I joke about that, but I think that's good, right? I mean, it shouldn't be a bunch of 40-year-olds
right.
having a scene. Like, it should be the kids like that.
Yeah.
Like,
And that's what that was kind of the next point I was gonna sort of lead into is there's always sort of this like next generation coming up. And maybe this is like Minneapolis specific, but I don't see a lot of that here. And I think it's people our age who are, kind of doing stuff to bring that to the kids where we didn't have that,
yeah. I also think I wonder sometimes too how much of it exists in a different way than we maybe it seems like kids aren't doing anything but then they also might not know, or we just might not know what they're doing. Chances are we don't know what. It's probably good that we don't know what.
It's all in the TikTok underground.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna. I think it's a lot of it now is just like SoundCloud and
Yeah.
like people doing stuff online where.
And it's which I mean it's different, but and I think it's good. And then there's also places like Total Drag and Sioux Falls where you have Dan and Liz Nissen who were part of the Sioux Falls scene as teenagers, and then as adults, like in their 30s, they said they saw that there wasn't a space existing like the ones that we had, specifically like an all ages music space, and so they made it happen, which is great.
Yep. And we're bringing our kids to Total Drag to shows now, which is really cool to see, passing the baton.
Yeah, I took my kid to see when Motion City Soundtrack did their like reunion tour. They played 3 shows in Minneapolis, and I took him to one of those. So
it's awesome.
It's the younger kids they're still doing it.
Ours is 3, so she's really into like Disney musicals right now, but eventually we will introduce her to it.
Yeah. I just think like the kids are almost always going to be like they're just fine. Like I think I think we all go through a period where we think that we like fear for the youth or whatever, like they're missing out on, or because they're not experiencing things the same way we did. And so I try really hard, especially in the film, I tried not to lean too hard. It's in its nature, it's going to be nostalgic for people that were involved or people who were involved in a similar scene. But I tried not to lean into that nostalgia as much as into like this idea of young people, creating what they wanted out of, out of what they had in front of them, and sort of, because I think kids, it's always going to be different. I didn't have the same experiences as my mom and dad as a teenager, and that's fine. It's like and so I just like, I think hopefully my daughter will do something cooler than what I did when I was a teenager. And
she will.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a low bar, but.
No, but that's interesting because that's, in the same way that this is sort of like Anytown USA, it's also timeless in the sense of like, here's a group of kids who made something for themselves because there was no one else to do it for them. And this is how they did it, but this isn't the only way how to do it. Like,
but the other miracle of this documentary is the fact that we found footage. The 90s are this lost era of photos and video for sure. So it was really amazing that, Brian and the community that he leaned on for this were able to come up with enough footage to create a full length feature documentary. That's incredible.
And I've got to shout out Terry Taylor and Mark Peterson, who had a ton of footage of those old shows, which was extremely helpful. I told Mark this documentary would be boring as hell if it wasn't if he hadn't been lugging this giant video camera to Nordic Hall in 1989.
And as I'm one to undersell myself, so is Brian, and it took him hours upon hours to scour through this material and I mean, not even string it into a story. Like he created this incredible dialogue that again has resonated with so many people already. Like that, people don't really understand like all the work that goes into something like this. And for that, like I'm in awe of my husband for sure.
If we could isolate that.
Yeah.
For
that's his Christmas present.
Maybe that could be a good promo for this talk.
Yeah, no, I was going to mention the footage too, because that's a good point. Like the 90s were kind of this like black hole of not a lot of people were recording stuff, and especially there's the story about the Neurosis show where he was getting hit in the face, and then there's the footage.
Yeah, I was very lucky with that one. I was very, very lucky. Otherwise, we would have had to animate it.
Well, which kind of comes into my next question also. Okay. You guys are just like leading me into all the things I was going to do. So thank you.
It's not our first rodeo.
I've done this before. No, I thought it was, I think it's interesting with, documentaries being made now are going to be completely different because there is footage of everything. Like I saw the Lil Peep documentary that came out a couple years ago, and he tells a story about this party in Los Angeles, and then all of a sudden there's like 5 different angles of people with their camera phones who are there, and there's not that with our generation. So a way around that is, like you mentioned, animation. How did the animation for this come about?
Well, so I was talking during Patrick Saylor's interview. We're at the end, and I can't remember what I asked. It was just I think it was some generic question, like, is there any other like stories you can think of that we didn't touch on or anything you want to say? And then he just kind of launched into this really wonderful story about his friends being chased by some scary guys in a truck, and I knew as he was telling the story, I was like, well, I need to use this, but there's no photos or footage of this time. And so he was about halfway through the story where I was thinking, I'm going to ask Nate Jedlicka to animate this. And Nate was a guy who he interned at the advertising agency where I work, and so I had seen his work before, and so I think I sent him a message pretty quick, maybe the same night as the interview with Pat, and I was like, would you want to meet for a beer to talk about doing an animated sequence for the documentary?
I was going to mention too, part of the funding for this documentary came from the South Dakota Arts Council. So Brian, I mean, what another thing that's kind of inherently, baked into our DNA is to give back to the arts community. So I personally thought it was so great that he, invoked the help of area artists to be able to help with this project and use those funds specifically for artists.
Yeah. So Nate was paid. I'd like to take some credit. Well, that I gave him the money, but the money came from the South Dakota Arts Council.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that it's not lost. That I'm a generous
Sounds
man.
Like money laundering or something.
That's part of the public record now.
We watch the dollars and then.
But the South Dakota Arts Council. I'm glad Brian mentioned that they've been really supportive of the project and supportive of my work in the past, and they're just a very cool bunch of people.
Yeah.
So in a not very arts friendly state. So.
Yeah. When you were deciding who to talk to for this, how did you decide who you wanted, and was there anyone you did want that you weren't able to talk to either because of pandemic stuff or other?
So I started with just kind of a pad of paper and a pen, and it started with Terry. Obviously, like I needed to get buy-in from him because I knew that it wasn't going to be just about Terry, the promoter, but that he would have to be sort of he would be a big part of it just because he was a big part of the scene. And then from there, I started with my friends. It was people like I knew I was going to want to talk to Becky, and Joe Thone and, and Matt Rezac and all these people that, they were sort of my immediate circle. Like, I know there were hundreds of other people that I didn't talk to, that I didn't know from the scene. And you kind of, so I was self-conscious about it at first. It was like, oh, is this just going to be me talking to my friends? But then you also talk to people, and they say, oh, have you talked to so-and-so, or did you know so-and-so? And so immediately it started like kind of branching out that way, to where I was, talking to people like Dan Dittmer, who was a Rapid City promoter who worked pretty closely with Terry and Chad Pettit in the early days of the scene, coordinating shows for bands. And then, or Kristen Conkright, who I didn't know when we were going to shows, but who was great. So I mean, everyone. I left every interview with a list of people, that I had to talk to, and if I had talked to them all, I would still be setting up interviews, And so when it came to the traveling, it was really just about what could I afford, early on, I didn't want to do, in 2018, 2019, I was like, oh, I wouldn't want to do a Zoom interview, or I guess at that time it would have been like a Skype, that'll look weird. and so I kind of planned, a trip to Seattle, because I either was going to go to Seattle, Portland, or Southern California. And it was really, it was my decision to go to Seattle instead of the Pacific Northwest instead of Southern California was selfish in one, because I wanted to hang out with my friend Sean. I don't get to see him very often, and he was a big part of the scene, and he was a big part of my life at the time. And then also, I just knew it would be easier to get around the Pacific Northwest. I could cover more territory than Southern California. And it also, I just thought it was interesting that there's a pocket of Sioux Falls people in the Pacific Northwest.
Significant pocket.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And so that was like kind of, that was selfish, because I just wanted to go up there. And then it was mostly about like logistics. I knew I could like, I could afford like basically one trip. And
so how many days could I go with our daughter without going insane?
Yeah, this was like, our daughter was like 10 months old.
Yeah.
Like, this was early. It was a very, in retrospect, it feels like a real like midlife crisis kind of move on my part, and I swear that wasn't the plan. but yeah, I had some real cats in the cradle moments when I'm, 3 nights away from my baby daughter. But yeah, so there were, but then as far as who I didn't get a chance to talk to, there's dozens. I would have loved to talk to Nathan Thielen, who was my best friend, and all through grade school, he was in Pretty Girls Make Graves, and he's Drug Cabin right now. He's also like a master carpenter somehow, because he's one of those guys that's just good at everything that he does. And so I know it's very annoying. Joey Lynch is like that too, who's in the documentary. I'm like, you son of a bitch. But yeah, so I didn't get to talk to people that I wanted to.
And there was a moment too, again, we were talking about, do we need to make this a little bit more broader scope than Sioux Falls? So we had kicked around the idea of like contacting somebody from Green Day, because Green Day had been through town a few times. But
and they were pretty close to Terry. And then, so it was that, but, and that, so we,
That's interesting too.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about like trying to, I don't know. It was kind of a push and pull at first about like whether we want it to be a big story, and do you want like commercial appeal, or do you want to do right by your scene, sort of?
Right.
And so first and foremost, I wanted to do right by the scene, and so that was the number one priority. And then we kind of worked from there. And I think, but then I was sending out, we're doing the mailing for this first round of pre-orders, and I see that we've sent things out to 65 cities and 24 states and 4 countries. And so I'm like, well, I think there must be a broader appeal than, than 50 people in Sioux Falls, which was my biggest fear.
All my friends and my mom and dad.
Friends and family. So I think hopefully we threaded that needle well enough that there's enough appeal.
Yeah, and I like that it is, it's everyone who is involved in the, it's not like I have friends who have made movies with Dave Grohl in them, and that's great, but you don't need Dave Grohl and everything. So
Yeah.
I like that it was sort of, it made it a little more personal.
Yeah. I mean, I nod sagely as I have Ian MacKay.
Yeah, but
Ian MacKay is like
he should be in
Larry
everything.
Livermore.
Yeah, exactly. He's that's sort of when people are like, how did you get Ian MacKay in your documentary? I'm like, how would I keep him out of a documentary? He's he's in all of them. But it was just a matter of and it was just sending an email basically. And then and Ian said too, when we were starting the call, he said the reason I wanted to be a part of this is because I recognized myself and my friends in in the reel that I sent him. And he's like, we were all just kids sitting on corners, outside of venues, hanging out. And so that's
yeah. And he has one of my favorite lines in the movie, which I'm probably paraphrasing a little bit, but when he says that it's not an accident that all of these people were in a room together doing this. And you kind of show that in the doc where people may not be involved in music anymore, but they're opening tattoo shops or breweries or teaching kids how to play drums. That sort of DIY ethos kind of stays with you. And I think that really shows in the film. And
and we kind of wanted to focus not just on bands too. A lot of people have been in amazing bands and play amazing music, and a lot of them are featured in the documentary. But we also wanted to show it wasn't just about the bands, because that was a theme that everyone talked about too, is you didn't go to a show because you wanted to see whatever band you had never heard of that was traveling through. You went to the show because you wanted to see your friends and you wanted to hang out, and you just wanted to. I think we were all sort of living off of that energy. You kind of get through the day at school. In some cases, people are just they're keeping their head down. I think most of us were kind of keeping our head down day to day as teenagers, but then you go to a show and that's where you got your energy. That's what really got you through. Yeah. And that didn't, the music at that point was sort of a means to an end. And I don't mean to diminish the role of bands, but that the music wasn't always what was changing people's lives. It was the community.
Yep.
Yeah. I can remember very clearly, going to Catholic school and hating it. But then Friday, Saturday night, it was well, who's playing at the VFW or the Knights of Columbus? That doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone who doesn't go to my school, who I actually like, is going to be there. So, and that's the, like you said, that's kind of the important thing. It's those relationships that you build out of something like that, and not necessarily seeing Green Day, although it would have been awesome to see.
It would have been great. Yeah. I think the people that saw Green Day at Nordic Hall had a lot of fun, but yeah.
Well, I think we're about hitting our mark here, but I do want to make sure that you're able to mention the website and that people can order the movie.
Yeah.
Everything.
You can go to ireallygetintoit.com and you can order the DVD. You can also order a making of zine. That's kind of loosely making of and more of me working through my issues at the end of the process. We have a soundtrack available. You can buy that on cassette, that with a download code that features music from the movie. And then there's a set of postcards. I'm really shilling. Some stuff. We have one copy of the movie on VHS is available. And other than
there's only one left.
There's only one left.
Get it while it's hot.
Yeah. But yeah, and all of that said, I really get into it.com.
That's awesome. A friend of mine sent me, she got her package yesterday, I think, and she sent me a picture of everything laid out. And I was like, this is incredible. Like,
That's been a theme.
You guys went all out on this.
I got to give a shout out again to my friend Dessa, because I learned all about the pre-order game from Dessa. She she and Doomtree, like they 10 years ago, it was like, what's a pre-order? And then now I know that it works, and and it's fun too. I mean, like, that was the other thing. Like I haven't had a lot of sleep like the last 3 months, but
It's true.
But it's I think it's fun to turn your spare bedroom into a shipping and receiving center, and I love boxing things up and making things.
And as I mentioned earlier, like, I work for this entrepreneurial center, yet I don't think I've ever really experienced what it's like to be an entrepreneur until I've, been a part of this project. And I just have I have this newfound respect for it, where he's,
and for me,
and for my husband.
She finally respects me.
But
all it took was making a documentary.
Yeah.
It takes a lot. It really does. Like, it takes a brave, bold person to create something and put it out into the world and put a price tag on it. That was an interesting part of the process as well. Like, how do you price this thing? You don't want to price people out, but it's worth more than he's probably pricing it at, because of all the time that went into it, all of the little details that he put into the pre-order packages. It was so much fun to be a part of this process in whatever capacity I was. But yeah, like, it kind of gives you a bug to want to do something else, so we'll see what happens, I guess.
And I think people don't realize that sometimes. It's, they're just like, oh, why is it taking so long for my, pre-order or whatever? It's like, well, it's just, we don't have a huge corporation behind us. This
is the corporation right here.
Yeah. Yep. It's a couple people and their spare bedroom packaging things up. So,
and in this case, a lot of it was, your pre-order hasn't arrived because I haven't written the zine yet. So that was part of it,
because I needed him to change some diapers.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for
thank you
doing this with us and allowing us to premiere this film.
Man. I can't tell you how excited I am that Sound Unseen is running this.
Yeah, I'm. Hey, credit to Matt Rizak for hooking this up. Like, that guy has always been a huge supporter of Sound Unseen, and
he's been a huge supporter of this project for since pretty much day one. I think. Awesome. Great guy.
Awesome.
And a great band. Check out Dead History.
Yes, do that.
All right.